throwaway account because people know my main. I need advice about my increasingly unbearable living situation with my father-in-law. My husband Doug and I have been married for 17 years and have a daughter, Mia. 8 months ago, Doug's father, Bill, lost his wife of 45 years to cancer. It was devastating for everyone, especially Bill, who had been with his wife since high school. When Bill struggled after the funeral, Doug suggested his father stay with us temporarily while he adjusted. He said, just for a few weeks, and then we'd help him find a smaller place. I agreed because he lost his partner, though sometimes I wonder if I'm being treated like one now. What was supposed to be temporary has now stretched to 8 months. Bill has taken over Mia's bedroom, forcing our daughter to live in a makeshift space we created in the basement. It gets damp when it rains. Our 3 bedrooms are the main bedroom, Mia's old room now occupied by Bill, and a former home office converted to storage for all the things Bill brought. I work full-time as a nurse, which means 12-hour shifts that leave me drained. On top of that, I handle most household tasks, including caring for Bill. Over these months, he's become dependent on me for laundry, meal prep, and driving to appointments. Doug helps occasionally, but always has an excuse about work deadlines or being too tired. Before Bill moved in, Doug and I shared chores and decisions equally. Now it feels like I'm running the household for my father-in-law, while my husband does nothing. I've asked Doug at least a dozen times to find Bill his own place. Each time he either dismisses my concerns or says it isn't a good time. Dad's still grieving. The housing market is too expensive. Bill isn't ready for change, even though our household has already shifted. Bill treats me like a personal assistant. He leaves notes with grocery requests for expensive brands, asks me to make his appointments, and complains about how I fold his laundry, saying it's not like his wife's, even though I'm doing my best. Yesterday was my breaking point. I'd just finished a brutal shift at the hospital, 2 code blues and an understaffed unit, and was looking forward to coming home to a prepared meal because Doug told me on Sunday he'd handled dinner this week. I arrived home at 8:30 p.m., tired and hungry. The kitchen was spotless. No signs of dinner prep, no dishes. I stood there trying to process it. Doug and Bill were in the living room watching sports, surrounded by snack wrappers and empty cans. When I asked about dinner, Doug said they already ate sandwiches and didn't save anything for me, as if they forgot I needed dinner. Then Bill interrupted to say he assumed I would want to cook fresh food since I often say restaurant meals aren't healthy. I reminded Doug he agreed to handle dinner this week because of my shift schedule. He said he'd been busy with work projects, that it's just dinner, and asked why I was making a big deal. Doug said I was unsympathetic and that Bill was still grieving, as if that made everyone else's needs irrelevant. I was in my scrubs after 12 hours at work, being told I was selfish for wanting dinner ready. I noticed Mia slipping back to her basement room, uncomfortable with the tension. This isn't the first time she's had to escape an argument about her grandfather's presence. I think she feels like she doesn't belong in her own home anymore. Later that night, I went to get water and overheard Doug tell his father, "Don't worry about finding your own place anytime soon, Dad. She'll get over it. She always does." I feel trapped between supporting my husband's father and standing up for my boundaries. This arrangement has become indefinite without my consent, and I'm losing control of my own home. I'm starting to dread coming home from work. Home used to be private after hospital stress. Now it feels like another workplace where I care for everyone with no appreciation. At least I get paid at the hospital. My sleep is suffering, my anxiety is high, and I've started sitting in my car for 10 minutes before going inside. Anyone else do this? Edit. A lot of you asked about Mia. She tries to stay positive, but I can tell it's affecting her. Her grades are slipping since she doesn't have a proper study space, and she spends more time at friends' houses. When she's home, she stays in that basement room. I talked to Doug about how it impacts her, but he says she's being a typical teenager and that family makes sacrifices for each other. Apparently those sacrifices only apply to Mia and me. The basement isn't ideal. A bed, a desk, some shelving, but still a basement. The lighting is poor, one small window, and it gets damp when it rains. I've found mildew on her books twice now. Meanwhile, Bill has filled her bedroom with his belongings and family photos and took down her posters because they weren't his taste. I've noticed Bill acting as if he lives here full-time and contributing nothing. He rearranges things in the kitchen without asking, controls the TV, and has opinions about what groceries I buy and when I do laundry. Last week I came home to find he'd replaced our living room curtains, with ones from his old house because he thought ours were too modern. When I said he should have asked first, both he and Doug looked at me like I was being ridiculous. Doug said, "Dad's just trying to help improve the place. Bill doesn't contribute to the higher utility bills, extra groceries, or any expenses. Doug says his father is on a fixed income and shouldn't have to pay, but Bill still rents out his house and collects that income on top of his pension and Social Security. I haven't seen any of it. Doug and I used to be a team. Now it feels like Doug and Bill versus me and Mia. I never thought I'd be in this position, and I'm not sure what to do. Any advice on how to handle this without blowing up my family would be appreciated." Now for the first update. First of all, thank you all for your supportive comments on my previous post about my father-in-law's temporary stay, which has now lasted 8 months. Many of you suggested I have a serious conversation with Doug about timelines, and I finally did. So after that dinner I mentioned in my last post, I took the advice to talk privately with Doug when Bill wasn't around. I waited until the next day when Bill was at his weekly doctor's appointment. When Doug got home from work, I asked if we could talk about something important. He looked defensive, but agreed. I tried to stay calm despite feeling frustrated. I explained how the current living situation was creating tension in our home, affecting Mia's schoolwork, and straining our marriage. I asked for a concrete timeline for Bill to move out, not vague promises of soon or when he's ready, which could become never. Doug actually listened and agreed we should start looking at senior apartments for his father. He said we'd tour a few places that week and make a plan. I felt hopeful for the first time in months, but that hope vanished quickly. 2 weeks have passed and no progress has been made. Doug made excuses about Bill being unwell, work emergencies, bad timing. Meanwhile, Bill has been moving more of his belongings from storage into our home. Last weekend, he had Doug bring over 3 more boxes of his late wife's china and photo albums. They're now in the living room. Mia's situation has worsened. Her midterm grades came in, and she's failing 2 classes she used to do well in. When I asked about it, she said it's hard to focus in her basement room. I feel upset seeing my daughter become withdrawn and defeated. Some of you warned this could affect her long term, and now I see it happening. Then I found out Doug had scheduled a tour at a nearby senior living community after I'd been pressing him, but canceled it without telling me. I saw the cancellation email on his tablet while charging it. When I asked, he said his dad wasn't ready and changed the subject. I didn't push it because Bill was in the next room. Yesterday I came home early and went to our home office, which has become a storage space for Bill's stuff and my small desk in the corner. I found Bill rummaging through my files and opening envelopes. I asked what he was doing. He said he was looking for stamps and kept going through my papers. I asked him to stop. He said, "We're family now. There's no need for formalities," and continued. I told him that regardless of family status, my personal space and belongings deserve respect, and that he needed to step away from my desk immediately. Then he started crying and said I was treating him like an intruder and that he had nowhere else to go, since Doug promised he could stay as long as needed. At that moment, Doug walked in and saw his father crying. Without asking what happened, he defended his father, demanding to know why I was upsetting a grieving man. He often uses grief to avoid responsibility. I tried to explain about finding Bill in my desk, but Doug cut me off and said I was being selfish and that family needs to stick together during hard times. Doug said they were going out for dinner together and left. I was left standing there as the villain after my privacy was violated. After they left, I checked on Mia and found her crying in her basement room. She told me she heard Bill saying to Doug, "Your wife doesn't want me here, but this is my son's house too." That upset me. This situation has created a divide in my marriage. Doug and Bill are aligned, and Mia and I are treated as nuisances. I feel powerless to change anything without being accused of cruelty. To answer frequent questions from my last post: 1. Yes, we own the house together. Both our names are on the mortgage. 2. No, Bill doesn't contribute financially. 3. Yes, I've suggested marriage counseling, but Doug says we don't need outsiders. 4. No, Bill's house hasn't been sold. It's sitting empty. I don't know what to do next. Doug is barely speaking to me since the desk incident, and the tension in the house is high. I'm considering more drastic measures, but I'm worried about what that would mean for my marriage and for Mia. Thank you all again for your support and advice on my last post. I've saved some helpful comments to reread when I'm feeling gaslighted about whether my feelings are valid. Any advice on what to do next would be appreciated. Now for the second update. Update 2. Sorry for the delay. My father-in-law moved in temporarily 8 months ago and is still living with us. It's been 3 weeks since the desk incident, and there's a lot of tension. Doug barely speaks to me directly, communicates through Bill, or leaves notes on the fridge. We only exchange functional remarks. Mia needs money for her field trip, or the internet bill is due. He spends evenings with his father watching sports or helping him organize more items that appear in our home. I've started researching senior living options since Doug isn't going to. I visited 4 communities within 15 miles and collected information packets, leaving them on the kitchen counter. Doug either ignored them or moved them to a drawer. I tried to bring it up once while doing dishes, and he walked out mid-conversation. Mia asked if she could stay at her friend Jenna's house on weekdays because the basement is damp and she can't sleep. When I asked why she hadn't mentioned it, she said she didn't want to add to the problems. She's 15 and worried about being a burden at home. I feel like I'm failing her. I agreed to the arrangement after checking with Jenna's mom, who was understanding. Doug barely reacted when I told him, just nodded and said, if that's what she wants. I held back from arguing in front of Mia. I had lunch with Doug's sister yesterday, and she told me that Bill received a life insurance payout after his wife died, enough to afford his own place. When I asked why he hadn't used it for housing, she said, I thought you knew about that? No, I did not. That evening after Bill went to bed, I confronted Doug. At first he denied it, but when I mentioned his sister, he admitted he's been using the money to invest rather than find housing. He said, Dad deserves security for his future. I said I deserve security in the present. He rolled his eyes and walked away. Yesterday, after dropping Mia at Jenna's for the week, I came home to find Bill had rearranged my kitchen. He moved appliances, mixed up my storage containers, and dismantled the spice rack. Bill said he improved the kitchen layout to make it more efficient, referring to how his late wife organized their home. He said Doug told him I had been too busy to keep the house in order, so he decided to help. I explained it's not appropriate to change someone else's space without permission. He got defensive, raised his voice, and said he was contributing while I was finding fault. Doug heard and came in. He scolded me for being unappreciative of his father's efforts. When I said most people ask before reorganizing someone else's kitchen, he scoffed. I brought up the insurance money and the housing options. Doug accused me of going behind his back and prioritizing my comfort over his father's. He said Bill will stay indefinitely because this is my house too, and I have a right to help my family. After they left, I realized my needs and my daughter's needs are secondary to Bill's comfort and Doug's guilt. Last week, I found 3 more boxes in our guest room closet. They contained photo albums, old trinkets, and birthday cards Bill's wife had given him. It's clear he's moving his entire life into our house with no intention of leaving. I decided I can't continue like this. This morning, I called a family therapist for next Tuesday and drafted an email to Doug outlining what needs to change. I scheduled a family meeting for this weekend to set firm boundaries and a timeline for Bill's move. I know this might cause a serious rift in my marriage, but I'm not sure how much we have left to save. 8 months ago, I agreed to help a grieving man who lost his wife. Now I'm blamed for wanting my daughter to have her bedroom back. Part of me wants to pack up and leave with Mia, but I need to try one more time to make Doug understand what this is doing to our family. Now for the final update. Final update. My father-in-law's 8-month temporary stay is finally coming to an end. Thank you all for your support and advice. I couldn't have made it through without this community. It's been about 2 weeks since my last update when I scheduled that family meeting. Those were the most stressful 2 weeks of my marriage. I spent a lot of time preparing because I saw it as my final option. If this didn't work, I was ready to take more drastic measures. I'd already looked into temporary housing for Mia and me. Before the meeting, I spoke with a marriage counselor privately. I didn't tell Doug. The counselor gave me strategies for approaching the conversation constructively and helped me organize my thoughts. She suggested I acknowledge everyone's feelings while standing firm on boundaries, though it wasn't easy. I talked with Mia the night before. I asked how she felt about everything. She said Bill had been entering her basement space, organizing her things, and reading her private journals. She hadn't told me because she didn't want more conflict between me and Doug. I was furious, but stayed calm. On the meeting day, I had printed information on 3 senior communities, organized my points, and practiced my speech. Doug and Bill sat on one side of the table while Mia and I sat on the other. I started by acknowledging Bill's grief and saying we wanted to support him after his wife's death. I spoke calmly and said the arrangement was damaging my marriage and Mia's well-being. I presented the research I'd gathered, including a community with a gardening club Bill had mentioned. Doug tried to interrupt with objections, but I held my ground. "Please let me finish," I said. He stayed quiet. Mia spoke up. "I don't feel like this is my home anymore," she said. "I feel like I'm just visiting a house where Grandpa lives." Mia told everyone about Bill entering her basement space and reading her journal. She said she didn't matter in her own family anymore. She asked her father why her need for privacy and personal space was less important than her grandfather's comfort. Doug looked shocked, then uncomfortable, then he seemed to understand. He looked at his daughter. Bill said he was trying to keep things tidy like his wife would have done. Mia said his actions violated her trust. Doug looked at each of us in turn, then spoke. "This has gone on too long. Dad, we need to get you set up in your own place within the next 30 days. Bill protested, but Doug cut him off. He mentioned the insurance money and said it was time for these changes after his mother's passing. I realized these were the words I'd been trying to use for months. We spent the next hour reviewing the senior living materials. Doug asked questions about amenities and costs. Bill was quiet but seemed interested in the community with the gardening club. By the end, we had a plan. Doug will take Bill to tour 2 facilities this week. They'll decide within 7 days and complete the move within 30 days. Doug also agreed to return Mia's room to her immediately. Bill will use the guest room until he moves out. That night, after Bill went to bed, Doug and I had our first real conversation in months. He admitted he'd been avoiding his mother's death by focusing on his father. He apologized for what he'd put Mia and me through. I told him I understood his grief, but that we needed to be partners again. He agreed to start marriage counseling, which surprised me. The next day, Doug and Mia cleaned out her room and moved Bill's things to the guest room. Mia hugged her dad. It's been about 10 days since the meeting. Doug and Bill toured 3 senior communities, and Bill chose the one with the gardening club. They've submitted the application and put down a deposit. Move-in is set for 3 weeks from now. Mia is back home full-time in her own room. She and I have spent more time together, rebuilding what was lost. Things between Doug and me are complicated. We've had 2 counseling sessions, which have been painful and productive. There's a lot of trust to rebuild. I'm not sure if our relationship will ever be the same, but at least we're both putting in the effort. As for Bill, he's been cooperative since the meeting. Seeing how his presence affected Mia was a wake-up call. He apologized to her and has started packing. He's talking about decorating his new apartment. Edit. A few people asked about the life insurance money. Doug has agreed to use that money for Bill's housing costs instead of investing it. The senior community requires a deposit and monthly rent. Bill can live there for years with the insurance money. Doug and I discussed financial transparency, and he's agreed to be more open about these decisions going forward. I've learned that I need to speak up sooner when boundaries are crossed. I let things go too far because I was trying to be understanding, but that didn't help anyone. Thank you all for witnessing my journey and providing support when I needed it. Your comments helped me stay strong when I felt unreasonable for wanting my own home back.